You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host as always. This week we're doing a suburb spotlight. It's been a while, but it's time to get out to the countryside. For the first time ever, we're going east towards Kalgoorlie. It's a part of the state that Brendan Ptolemy and I have been talking about a bit recently because for the first time in a while, a very cyclical market there, it's actually got some green shoots. It's been doing well over the last couple of years, and there is some confidence that it won't be a blip on the radar, that there is some long-term sustenance because of a bit of diversification and strength in its industries. The man I wanted to talk to today has two strings to his bow when it comes to coming onto the podcast today. He has sold an absolute monster of properties in Cal, and he's also received the REIWA Rookie of the Year last year. Elliot Briers of Kalgoorlie Metro Real Estate, thanks so much for coming in, mate.
Thanks, Trent. Thanks for having me, mate. Absolutely.
To be Rookie of the Year in general is something that most kids should be pretty proud of, but to sell 82 properties in what actually turned out, I believe, to have been 9 months in the game by that point in time, you know, very well for someone in their 20th year, let alone someone in their first year.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate that. Yeah, not really something I really thought about too much coming into the game. I think everyone sort of starts the job just trying to get their first sale, and I think I was pretty lucky to join an office where it wasn't an expectation, but almost just a standard held amongst the other agents where everyone was sort of going to play their part and get the 5, 6, 7, 8 a month. I came in to a very hot market in Kalgoorlie where people were buying and selling quite a lot, and I suppose I just, slotted in quite quickly, head down, tail up, and definitely wasn't on the horizon to try and win the award, but it was a nice accolade to get at the end of it. So
to win the award, you're up against some pretty good performers as well at the time. You weren't the only one in your own stratosphere there. There were some guys who were hot on your tail, but to get 82 sales regardless, I know agents who are number one in their suburb who have been doing this for decades, who are very, very good at their job, very hardworking as well, who don't come close to 82 sales a year, let alone 9 months, right? So well done on that. I assume there's many more big things to come.
Thank you, mate.
Let's hope that for years to come, Kalgoorlie is benefiting from clearly what is a good service. And maybe for you, there's bigger and better things on the horizon as well.
Thank you very much. I sure hope so.
That wasn't the point to get you in, though. The big point is to talk about Kalgoorlie. It's an area that we haven't covered before. As I said, we've spoken about it a bit recently because there's a bit of interest. It's bubbling up. Finally, Kalgoorlie is getting a little bit of love. And that doesn't start from people just wanting to live in Cal. They're obviously there for, I assume, work.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like on the ground at the moment before we go back in time and understand some of the history of the place?
Absolutely.
What's the feel right now, mate?
Yeah, it was a funny one because Kalgoorlie hasn't always had a big FIFO market. It used to be quite a push from local businesses or mining companies to have people on the ground living in town. Obviously, as time goes on, companies expand, and then FIFO had to become the option. Sort of since that's happened sort of 20 years ago, the town has in some stages struggled depending on the stage of the cycle. As it stands right now, footy clubs are full, housing is a problem, accommodation's a problem, and there's lots of people around. You drive down the main street and Hannon Street and you might drive for 100 metres trying to find a parking spot. Wow. Unheard of in a place like Kalgoorlie, and I'm sure people that were there 10 years ago would go there now and think, wow, what's happened?
What has happened?
Obviously purely based around mining. Pretty lucky over here in WA that we generally sort of rely a little bit on mining, and obviously Kalgoorlie at the forefront of that. A lot of industry around mining, but we're very lucky to have a lot of people coming and going. There's some crazy stat about 1,000 people a week coming and going in terms of in work. And I don't think there's many places in WA where that happens.
For people who are maybe on the East Coast or don't know a lot about Kalgoorlie, can you explain what is the industry here? So obviously mining, but most people, I hope would know it's the home of the super pit, right? We're
Absolutely.
Talking gold.
The richest square mile on earth, they call it.
There's no iron ore here. It's all gold, bit of lithium, bit of copper, right?
Yeah, a bit of nickel in there as well. Yeah, so basically talking like 1860s gold rush, people come out there trying to strike gold. As that sort of moved on, Coolgardie was the place to be, not so much Kalgoorlie. As it expanded, you hear of places like Gwalia, which is now a ghost town, and then obviously Laverton, Leonora, places like that. Kalgoorlie and Boulder were their own separate towns. It was only sort of 1989, I think it was, they amalgamated and you hear Kalgoorlie Boulder. So yeah, not always been the hotspot, it's just been the goldfields as a whole. It's sort of last been the 30, 40 years where Kalgoorlie Boulder has been the thing running it, and obviously the super pit being a big player in that.
Yeah, obviously, I think it was Bondi, wasn't it, who amalgamated all these little shafts. I think it was 40-something shafts at the time, little mining companies there, and thought, guys, why don't we just get our heads together, get rid of all the sand in between, and make it the super pit for what it is today. That's obviously changed the place. But, you know, even in the last 10 years, I having worked in the gold industry myself back when I was in my early 20s for a company that managed the super pit actually, I'm very aware of the cyclical nature of Kalgoorlie. When I first started my career, gold was absolutely smashing. The price was about $1,800 US. Then over time, after the GFC, that gold price starts to fall through the floor again as demand falls away. Then when the gold price starts to drop, it becomes less economic to develop. Mining companies start to move into care and maintenance and just wait essentially until prices go up again. So that's, I guess, what you're talking to is that cyclical nature of if we can't profitably mine, we're not going to, and therefore people lose their jobs.
Correct. And I think from a town that's also trying to manage population with industry as well, it becomes a tough one. And when that price does float around a little bit, you go from quite decent vacancies of 10-15% down to about 0.3% we're at the minute. So from a housing or a property point of view, we obviously react very much to the mining and what's going on there. But yeah, there's definitely some challenges involved. So
well, that's the point, right? It's a town that's small enough that small changes in population make a big difference to the supply stock. Everyone needs to obviously live somewhere, and obviously supply lags demand. So if a business wants to start up and bring in 200 workers, 200 staff to their operation, well, it would take years to get maybe 100 houses up, right? And it also, workers' accommodation is something that's not as prevalent in somewhere like Kalgoorlie as it is in Karratha, for example. So FIFO has become a reality. We're now at a gold price again of over $1,900 US, which is a price that is very profitable for a lot of these long-time mining companies. When you talk about it being a town that is chockers to the brim, it's not surprising.
Yeah.
It's one of those towns that I assume if you know where the gold price is, you know where the property market is.
Obviously, no one's moving to town to live by the beach. So we generally find that when it does fluctuate, obviously it becomes more of an accommodation shortage as opposed to a housing shortage. Like you said, you can't just turn around and create 500 places for people to live. So generally companies start buying up existing housing in town. When there are people looking to move to town, mums and dads and families and whatnot, we do find that stock is dried up quite a lot. And that's where we're at the minute.
There's not many builders in the market, is there?
Correct. No, there's probably 4 at the moment that are sort of building that mum and dad product. In terms of development style commercial product, it's few and far between.
Did the building boost, the building grants that came in 2020, did that have an impact in Kalgoorlie at all?
Absolutely. I think we, at the time, had about 65 blocks on the market during that building boost. And I think we're down to about 16 for a while there. It wasn't really expected at the time. I think a lot of people were pessimistic about where the market was going to go. A lot of people jumped in and pulled their socks up and got into it. We haven't really felt the building timeline extend as much as what other people might have, but definitely from a market point of view, land supply has dried up a little bit. You've got Development WA who are doing their bit to keep land as well, and then a couple of private investors. But yeah, I think it's what the town needed at the time. We don't build 150 houses a year. Kalgoorlie is the sort of place that builds 40 or 50 houses. We're not going to solve a housing...
In a good year.
Yeah, we're not going to solve a housing crisis in the space of 2 or 3 years. There are conversations being done in the background in terms of, some accommodation options, not so much housing, accommodation options to counteract the requirement and the demand from mining companies. And I think, it's welcome in something in a market right now. You want to try and take advantage of that, and that's what's happening. So,
it's a tough one, isn't it? There's 2 sides to the coin here, both extremes. We don't want either of them. One, in a situation like it is right now, where it's bursting at the seams and people are living in hotels. The other side, though, where half a suburb is lying empty for 3 or 4 years, and then crime and all that starts to come through as well.
Correct.
That swing, that cyclical nature in Kalgoorlie is one that investors, if you're looking in this area, need to understand. But the reason we're talking about Kal today is because if you're looking at the cycle, it's sort of the time where you'd probably dip your toes in the water right now, if not a year ago now. But my view, as I'm assuming yours is as well, is that Kal's got a bit of time to run. There looks like there's some medium to long-term sustainability in Kalgoorlie for the first time in a decade. I
think a lot of people have always thought these cycles that we go through is probably 7 or 8 years. I think for the first time, people, and they're always going to be optimistic, are looking a little bit more long-term. I think the pressures that we see in the market at the moment in terms of interest rates and whatnot don't affect a place like Kalgoorlie as much. Correct. So your average medium house price is about $350 to $380. Also, the benefit of Kalgoorlie is it's mining, so generally higher incomes. So people that are going for a loan generally can still get the loan if they've got the deposit. The serviceability becomes the hard part when you're looking at interest rate rises. People that have higher incomes in a place like Kalgoorlie
smoke it in.
Correct. So it's more a serviceability problem with interest rates. Kalgoorlie, higher wages, doesn't really have as much of a problem. So therefore, I think it will ride this wave pretty well.
As long as the industry keeps continuing in its positive nature. And can you tell us something about, from your local knowledge, where's it going in Kalgoorlie?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got some big swingers doing some really, really big things out there. Your Northern Stars and KCGMs and whatnot, and they're playing a big role in what's going on. The Super Pit's just signed a new lease to keep going. It's a positive outlook. There's a lot of towns around Kalgoorlie that operate, and I think people don't really think about them. In terms of mines that operate, you've probably got 150 k's worth of travel that some people are doing from town just to go and work on mine sites. You hear the horror stories about no accommodation in places like Leonora and Laverton, and they're having to stay in a place like Kalgoorlie and then commute every few days or something like that. Not sort of where we want to be, but I suppose it's just a sign of the times to see where Kalgoorlie's going, or the goldfields are going, and obviously Kalgoorlie Boulder being the key place behind it, and sort of wearing the load a little bit.
Do you invest in Cal yourself?
I do, yeah. I've a pretty positive outlook in terms of where things go and sort of what advantages there are in a place like Kalgoorlie. I don't necessarily think that, obviously there is cyclical natures to Kalgoorlie, and if you're in a position where you think there might be a point in the market where you need to jump out in a short amount of time, then potentially Kalgoorlie might not be the place to go should the cycle change. But I think there definitely is some really good opportunity.
Let's talk about the housing stock. I'm assuming there's a lot of older stock. We're trying to get the most we can out of these properties over decades and decades. Can you talk to the options we've got here, from the smallest, cheapest property to the largest, most expensive, highest value properties? What does it look like? What are the housing types? What are the building materials?
Yeah, so it's a bit crazy at the moment. We've got the old sort of asbestos houses built South Boulder, those sort of areas. You can pick up a 500 square metre block with an old asbestos house on it for, sub 200 grand.
Still livable?
Yeah, and the crazy thing about it is, they're 3x1 and they're currently getting rental appraisals and, applications for $450 a week.
So the rental yield's through the roof?
It's madness. It's madness. And obviously there is the obvious investor side in terms of maintenance. That can't be forgotten. So in terms of a short-term investment, there are options to make some money from that yield that you can get, but obviously from that product there is the maintenance side. In terms of, like I said, the last 20 years Kalgoorlie's been building 40 or 50 houses a year, so houses tend to stay new for a long time and they hold their value really well when they are being built.
What are they built out of? Steel, brick?
It's all brick veneer in Kalgoorlie, brick veneer and tin roof.
Where are they getting their bricks from? Trucking them in
Perth? Yeah.
Wow.
On the train, obviously, yeah. So there is obviously, I think when all supply issues happened down in Perth and people were worried about not getting supplies for a few weeks, we were okay in Cal because we've always been ordering them 3 or 4 months in advance.
Yeah, you had to.
Exactly right. It's been second nature to us. So there's a real sort of feel around Cal that newer product that is popping up, and like I said, there's not a lot of it. It does tend to hold its line, but what we're finding right now is with rental prices going stupid, anything is renting for a good price and the yields are crazy, and we're finding the investors from everywhere coming in to pick up something. So,
well, when you think about the money that people make in mining, and then you think about what people are charging in a place like Karratha, I'm hearing of rents getting close to $2,000 a week again in Bainton. And then you think about $600-700 a week in Kalgoorlie. It's a drop in the ocean, really.
It makes me shiver. Yeah. I mean, I hear some of the ones that we're getting now. We have rental appraisals coming across the desk and people are offering $1,200 for a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home. It's not quite at Karratha and potentially where Port Hedland has possibly been in the past. We're not there yet. Shiver at the prospect that we will get there, but no, I think it's a pretty healthy balance at the moment. Obviously, if housing supply or accommodation supply, two different topics, sort of start to level out a little bit, I still think it's a pretty good place to be.
How expensive can it get in Cal? What's the most expensive thing you've seen for a residential house in the suburbs?
There's some pretty nice ones. Generally, big blocks of land tend to hold a lot of value. People in Kalgoorlie love their land, love their sheds, love the pool. For a standard resi block of about 700-800 squares, the most I've seen is about 1.2 or just over. Really nice house, beers on tap, all the rest that you sort of see in the Peppermint Groves and the nice areas of Perth. But yeah, it's not a very big product in Kalgoorlie, probably 1 or 2 around. So yeah.
Maybe the mayor's living in that one.
Something like that, yeah. Well, he wouldn't want me to say that, but yeah.
We know what product we're looking at now. We understand a lot of the benefit is the yield if you're not going to be living in it. Who is buying right now? If you could personify your buyer, is it a family? Is it a FIFO fella? Is it an investor? What does it look like most likely?
So the biggest thing that we look at the moment as a sales team is sort of which price point we're looking at. Between the 250 and 350 market, you're generally looking at your people in Kalgoorlie that were only moving there for 3 or 4 years. There's a lot of those people around that want to live in a place like Cal. They're just graduated, they're just coming out there to earn some money, and they don't plan to live in there long term.
And don't want to pay massive rents.
So that's what we're finding. So they don't want to pay rent, or they don't want to pay the huge rents. So they're falling on the sword and saying, look, we'll just buy something in Cal. It's going to save us money in the 3 or 4 years that we want to stay, and they're the people saturating that market. In terms of the 450 plus, from an investor point of view, not talking mum and dads or owner-occupiers, we're finding a lot of people actually inquiring from over east. They are coming in and hearing the rumours about the brick veneer houses with a tin roof that might be 15, 20 years old. You can pick them up for sort of 400 to 450.
Which is below replacement cost.
Correct. and then still rent them out for $700 a week. It's just madness. So yeah, there's obviously the owner-occupier side that will go above that $450, but generally that $250 to $350 market, we're finding it saturated by people that were renting, probably didn't want to buy in Cal, but now pushing into that market because of the prices.
Are there many people moving there for the long term, in the same way that people have been moving down to Busselton or Bunbury or making the move to Karratha? Or is it really just a working stock right now?
It is. We generally have a pretty good industry in terms of, like I said before, having the graduates. A lot of nurses, teachers, fireys and whatnot do come out to a place like Cal to get started. The classic quote in Kalgoorlie is you come for 3 years and stay forever. Yeah, I don't think anyone...
one's up front saying I'm here for...
I don't think anyone moves to town and says I can't wait to spend 40 years here.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that grows on you and you start to fall in love with the place. Probably just has that effect on you in a small community, big enough to still have fun and do things and have a big enough crowd around, but obviously not small enough that you sort of find yourself getting stranded a little bit.
Who's selling right now?
This time of the year, obviously a lot of people coming and going from town. Like I said, a lot of people do actually stick to their word and get in 3 or 4 years. This time of the year, it's a lot of mums and dads that move around, obviously school years and whatnot. Investors who bought in the last boom are now potentially selling. They've probably had a positively geared rental investment for 5, 6, 7 years since the last boom, and they're now looking to get out. That might just be their investment position and what their outlook is at the moment, and they're looking to move on. But yeah, it's mainly just mums and dads this time of the year. That's a seasonal thing. But what we're finding is now, because we're getting back to those prices where they were probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, is some investors are looking to sell up. They might have existing leases on property and not be wanting to go around again another 3 or 4 year lease. So.
All right, so we've spoken about our product, who's buying, who's selling. Can we get a bit more deeper into the residential market in Cal? Cal isn't just one suburb. You've got your 6 or 7 suburbs within Kalgoorlie, and I guess they have different socioeconomic positions, different benefits, different price points. Can you walk us through those as if they were your children?
Yeah, correct. All right. You sort of look at a place like South Boulder and Boulder. They're generally sort of starting at the lower end in price point. Victory Heights is another one that's just off the border of those 2 suburbs, but has a lot of newer housing in there. They were probably built in the 80s. They are brick, they are tin roof, as opposed to Boulder and South Boulder. A lot of those are the old asbestos style or cladding style on stumps. As you head back towards town, you've got your South Kalgoorlie, which is again an older style, but still in that stump land in terms of no concrete slab, no brick veneer. Heading back through Cal, very similar, but are probably starting to move a little bit up in terms of the price point. You've gone from South Boulder and Boulder sort of talking mostly in that $250 to $350 range. You can get up to Kalgoorlie where prices start to get up to $500 for the nicer sort of houses, $550 depending on sort of age and where they're at. In terms of the new...
So this is the suburb of Kalgoorlie, right in the middle of town.
So now we're talking, so we've just moved from Boulder, which was its own town once upon a time, and moved back towards town.
Okay.
So now we're in Kalgoorlie. There's 2 ways to go. They get on the road back to Perth and go past Somerville and Broadwood. They are the 2 newer suburbs of town, probably talking last 20, 30 years. A lot of housing out there are bigger blocks, 800 square metres plus. Mum and dad, the more sort of nesting type, that have lived there for a long time and they've built the house they want to live in for a long time. Out there, you can go anywhere from $450 all the way up to about $700, $800 typically.
It's close to the airport as well.
Correct. And then you go from town and keep going outways. You've got Lamington, probably the nicest older area in Kalgoorlie.
What a name for a suburb, by the way.
Lamington, I know, yeah. And then obviously you would have heard the rumours about the golf course out there. It has been a really, really big step forward for Kalgoorlie. There's now, just have to guess, probably 200 to 250 houses out there at the moment.
Like a golf course estate?
It's an estate, yeah. Yep. So it's called Greenview Estate. They're bringing out probably 30 or 40 blocks a year out there.
Is that a development WA?
That's a development WA,
Yep.
Yeah. So
I assume it wouldn't have been a profitable development for anyone else, so they've done it simply just to help with stock?
Yeah, potentially. I think it's more so just sort of playing their bit and keeping land supply where it should be and trying to level it all out.
That's their job, right?
Correct.
Yep.
But yeah, that's been a big one. In terms of local land supply and where growth areas are, it's very, very hard to pick in a place like Kalgoorlie. We are landlocked by mining leases and also native title. So there's not really opportunity for developers to come in from outside and go on Google Maps and find a block of land on the outskirts of town and pick a big plot of land to subdivide. We are landlocked by those 2 things. So that's the challenge that you find in a place like Kalgoorlie. You got to kind of grow inwards as opposed to out.
Not the worst idea.
No.
What about Hannons? That's a very famous name, right?
Correct. So Paddy Hannon gets all the credit for obviously coming to Kalgoorlie and sort of establishing it as a mining town. The guy that did most of the work, I think, was Henry LaFleur at the time. He was the man that did all the hard work and Paddy was swanning it up. So, yeah, Hannons is a nice area as well. Development WA have done some work out there in Kalgoorlie. So that's also been expanding, but has also gotten to its point where it's at its max and it can't really go much further. So in terms of growth, you're sort of looking at the golf course. Hannons and Kalgoorlie are now looking a little bit more like an established area, with only one really looking like a up-and-coming at Kalgoorlie. So
Very good. So let's segue into development. You really quickly mentioned the constraints there. Is Kalgoorlie the sort of place where a developer could rock up and turn a buck doing some subdivision or some development?
I think absolutely. There are blocks of land internally to pick up a block of land and do a subdivision to get it going. The biggest thing that we find, or the biggest challenge that we have, is that people in Kalgoorlie live regionally. They generally have motorbikes and tools and want the shed and the big block of land. As an investor or a property developer, you understand that you want to meet
the market.
Correct. You want to also maximise zoning and scaling and whatnot. A lot of the time you find 1,200 square metre block, you couldn't chop it up 4 times, and the 300 square metre block market isn't what people are after. If you could go and buy a 10,000 square metre block, make 10 blocks, it'd fly off the books in 2 minutes. So we're finding that although you can grow internally, the market really, really shouts out for those bigger blocks. So from a developer point of view, it's often tough to try and meet the market, where you don't want to go totally low density and try and minimize the profits or the scale of what you're doing. But then if you go to the high density side of things, there's just not the capacity or the amount of people in town that are looking to buy that product.
That's interesting, especially given the constraints. Obviously, the zoning will be set up to incentivize that. But what you're saying is the people are still voting with their feet.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that, like I said, have lived in Kalgoorlie and they'll live there forever. The typical block in Kalgoorlie is 800 to a full quarter acre, and they want the pool, they want the shed, and they want the yard to deal with. Coming in and trying to develop 50 units from a high density point of view isn't really something that's been done yet. It is a market that'd be interesting to see if it does ever take off.
Are there any apartments at all?
No, not really. There's a couple of the main street above retail office space, but yeah, not really new apartment space. No.
That's really interesting, because you see a place like Karratha, it's had a couple of those now, and you think about Kalgoorlie, it's a mature market as well. It probably gets the money side of things, the cost, but also the entry point there. If it ever worked, I'm sure there'd be some market for your teachers, your nurses, and these sort of things to come in on a cheaper but much more low maintenance option for them. Again, it just has to work financially. Let's move into the final question, and I love this. I love asking this question because I get to hear a bit more about your personal preferences. You mentioned the median house price is about $350,000. Yep. With $350,000 in your pocket cash today, what would you buy in Kalgoorlie and on what street?
I'd probably be going to... There's a block of land on Hanbury Street in Kalgoorlie at the moment. I'd be going for that one there. You can pick it up for around 60K. It's about 400 square metres. You can put a little 2x2 or a 3x2 on that. Obviously, looking at new construction, you get the benefit of depreciation, but then also from a rental yield point of view, people love new property in a place like Kalgoorlie. A product like that will always be rented out, and you can generally do pretty well out of it. It won't cost you too much to do. Cheap land, sort of cheaper building in a 2x2 or a 3x2 product.
And what would be your favourite street in general in Kalgoorlie?
Probably Aslett Drive, where I live myself.
And where's that?
It's near next to the golf course. It's a nice spot out there. It's nice and quiet. I don't play a lot of golf myself. Probably should play a little bit more. But it's just a nice spot to be, off the beaten track a little bit. So, yeah, that's probably it for me.
Elliot Briers, Kalgoorlie Metro, Western Australia's Rookie of the Year for 2022. Thanks for coming in, mate, and good luck with the rest of your career.
Thanks, Trent. Appreciate it, mate. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!